So my talk is on Creative Commons, public domain, and copyright. And I am a layperson, not a lawyer. Definitely not a copyright lawyer. So this is just some of my thoughts, some of the things I found that helped me try to figure out whether or not I can use things in games. And if so, how do I give proper attribution? For the most part, I generally use Creative Commons. Creative Commons is very useful for this. So I'm going to go here. So copyright. This is to explain why I'm not going to go too much into detail. It is very complicated. It continually is evolving. For example, buildings. Yes. Oh, I have a question mark there, but I believe it was in the 90s about copyright for buildings was starting to be enforced. So buildings built after around 1990, maybe 1992, actually have copyright. So if you take pictures of these buildings, you actually they are subject to copyright. You can get in trouble for distributing them. So that's something to consider. Derivative works, also, taking a picture of something that's copyright is also subject to copyright. So you kind of have to be very careful with this. And definitely, if you have any questions, consult a lawyer, a copyright lawyer. All right, so a good resource I found for working on with copyright or learning about just kind of to navigate some of the pitfalls out there is actually a course on Coursera. I did this. It's probably not the most gripping stuff. But it was like lawyer, librarian people like certified in both. So it was like really so a bit nerdy, a bit on the dry side, and but at the same time I personally found it very interesting to sort of learn sort of things you have to watch out for. And that's where I learned about buildings. And they do go into other things like Creative Commons and other subjects, but it's a good starting point to at least know where you might want to watch out. Okay. So public domain. Copyright is expired, it's not renewed, something wasn't filed right. There are quite a few famous works in the public domain. For example, I'm sure everyone has noticed that there's quite a bit of H.P. Lovecraft inspired works out there, and that's because a lot of his stuff is actually in the public domain, and also not necessarily, and now you've got to take this with a grain of salt, it's not always clear who owns his work too. There's also that, so you got to be careful what year it is. It keeps changing because it's a matter of expired. I forget how far back it goes now, but and also always a good idea to double check. But it's somewhat under. There can be disagreements about who owns a copyright. So you can think you've got so H.P. Lovecraft is a good example. You can think you've got it all under control and you've got it figured out and you've reached out to the right people, but sometimes sort of some older works and stuff that there might be some disagreement on, you might have to do some additional research. So I think lawyers are good for if you really have any questions. Also, derivative works can also be under copyright. If something might be public domain, but something was created using that and sort of derivative from there, sort of inspired by, or it's someone else's work, that work that's been created will be under copyright. So you got to be careful about that when you're doing something similar to a public domain work. You don't want to do something like that don't want to look too much like someone who's already got a copyrighted work. And here's some resources on information about public domain and fair use. So, and the public domain, it basically means you can use it. If it is actually expired and very old stuff, it's It's actually expired. An example of something that's copyright, that's public domain, the copyright expired was Night of the Living Dead. That's one that has expired. There are also some other films, there's a whole list of them here, where you can watch them online and there's no copyright issues. Also, a while back there was the public domain game jam. That was a lot of fun. That's where I made a game that's where I did Wolf Unscripted. It was based off fairy tales, which are, at least in the old versions, public domain. All right. What? Never. That is one of the reasons copyright is so difficult, is because specifically they don't, every time the deadline comes up, Disney decides to lock it down. They work very hard to prevent people from using Mickey Mouse, in their own works. So that's one. So there's a lot of money tied up in some I want to say assets, but that's not quite the correct term. So some intellectual property. And so that's one of the reasons why copyright's so complicated. And one of the things that came out of that, and sort of a reaction to that, is Creative Commons. It was designed to make copyright less of a you have to go to a lawyer and actually get this all worked out. You can actually this was sort of an idea that the rules for usage were upfront, and you could. It's human reader. They have 3 levels: human readable, computer readable, and like lawyer talk, and they also have different levels of copyright. So you can basically decide how you want your work to be used, and it doesn't have to be a whole legal thing. I know this for some of our audience members, that might be a real bummer, but. So you can check that out here. How many people have heard of Creative Commons or are familiar with it? Okay, everyone knows about Creative Commons, so. All right, so I might be telling you stuff you already know, but.
Yeah, there's different types of Creative Commons licenses.
Yep. So you've got Creative Commons 0, which is basically like public domain. You've got attribution. They've got different versions. They've got up to version 4.0, which is like an international license. Attribution share alike, no derivatives, non-commercial, no derivatives. So you have these options. You can, you just have to, in the case of like attribution, you just have to say, okay, I used this work and I got it from here and it was created by this person. And I didn't create it initially. And that's kind of the most common one I tend to use. Share alike, you have to share the image so other people can use it. I guess, yeah. I'm not as familiar with no derivatives, but I imagine it's you can't change it and shift it and make it something else. And non-commercial, don't sell. Don't use my work to sell. To sell. Don't try to sell my work as your own. Which that makes sense, and it's about like the most restrictive right here. So any questions about that? Nope. Okay. So attribution rules, you must include the creator, a link to the work itself, what modifications have been made to the work. So if you like crop a photograph, like I frequently do for my Renpine, my visual novels, you should probably mention, I cropped it, or if you did some differences, put it through different filters, so people know that it's not the original work. It doesn't reflect the actual work of the original creator. If you made it look terrible, it's not their fault, that kind of thing. You also want to have a type of Creative Commons license that's associated with it, and also link to it, so they can check it out themselves. Now, there are other ways to identify usage rules. It's like some places they'll literally will have rules out there that aren't necessarily, strictly speaking, Creative Commons. Morgue file for example, pretty much use it. You just can't pass it off as your own. It's not really. They don't really reference Creative Commons. Generated content sometimes require attribution, like Juke Deck. That's one that I demonstrated during the audio generation for the talentless. They asked that you say, generated for using Juke Deck. Images on social media, and there's some so context-dependent rules. Now, this can get into some hairy stuff. I probably shouldn't mention this too much, but apparently there are certain rules about how you can use images like in social media. You probably don't want to take something off someone's feed, and then you don't want to take someone off someone's feed and try to sell it. And not that I think anyone would, but that's just not. Now, share, like, that kind of thing. That would be presumably acceptable. But trying to use it in something you were planning on selling or distributing would be a big no-no. All right. Sometimes, so creators also display the format that they want you to use. Kevin MacLeod, he has Creative Commons, and he's got this whole boilerplate thing you can just copy and paste. Also, be careful. Copyright can be surprising. If you have any questions about it, do your research, and if it's really something you're going to sell or something. Talk to a lawyer. So if you have any real big questions and you're concerned about you might be getting into trouble. All right, so that's it. So also a little.
Contact the original author.
Yeah, that's a good idea too. If you know who the original author is, it can be difficult to tell sometimes online. I mean, you can get in trouble if somebody says something is theirs, you use it, and so you could potentially get into trouble if you pull something someone says is theirs, and it's you end up using it and it actually belongs to a third person. So.
You gotta search, even if you can't.
Yeah, definitely good to do your research and check. But like I said, not a lawyer. In the interests of not getting into trouble, I'm not giving legal advice.